This lecture is on Korean geography, history, and the Sunshine Policy. Geographically speaking, the Korean peninsula is vulnerable to invasion, both from the land and from the sea. Though Japan is not far from the South Korean coast, it should be said that the 1947 Constitution suggests Japanese invasion of the Korean peninsula is a highly remote possibility. Korea's vulnerability is an obvious contrast to Japan, an island country that has historically been very difficult to invade. Korea has served as a cultural land bridge for the emergence of Confucianism and Buddhism in Japan. Korea, of course, also has a substantial cultural legacy rooted in Confucianism and Buddhism. Confucianism, in particular, helps us to better understand the shape of the modern Korean state. You will recall that Confucianism emphasizes merit in public service as well as hierarchy and bureaucracy. These descriptors work well in noting the centralized modern Korean state. The modern era of Korean history begins with Japanese colonization of the Korean peninsula. This lasted from 1910 through 1945. From 1910 through 1919, there was direct rule over Korea by the Japanese military. Then from 1919 through 1945, due to public protest, there is some relaxation of that colonial rule. Still, the effects of colonization were significant on Korea. There was rapid urbanization, as Korea became the second most urbanized country in Asia after Japan. There was also substantial commercial expansion, with much of it directed toward Japan's militarization and eventual war effort during World War II. Another particularly dark chapter of the colonization was the use of comfort women, or sex slaves, in likely the hundreds of thousands, for Japanese soldiers. It was not until the 1980s that comfort women began to receive notice for what happened to them. It wasn't until the 1990s when the Japanese government acknowledged the existence of the comfort women. Another indignity foisted upon Koreans was their impressment in Japan's wars, meaning they were forced to fight for the Japanese emperor. And by the late 1930s, more than 80% of Koreans changed their names to Japanese names after pressure from the Japanese government, according to the Columbia University Asia for Educators project. Having said this, Korea did benefit from the enforced rapid urbanization and industrialization under Japanese colonial rule. This would later give a foundation for South Korea's wealth through the profits of large corporations called chaebol, akin to the Japanese keiretsu, though at great societal cost. After World War II, the victorious Soviets and Americans divided Korea into zones of occupation, one zone in the north, the other in the south. The story of the division is pretty capricious. Colonels Dean Rusk, later to become Secretary of State during the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, and Tick Bonesteel were given the hasty task of deciding on a division line. They settled on the 38th parallel, some 30 miles north of Seoul, so that Seoul would remain under American influence. The 38th parallel is roughly in the middle of the map on the slide. The Soviets agreed to the division in mid-August 1945. When the Soviets and Americans failed to reach agreement on how to unify the Korean zones, the country split in two in 1948. The Republic of Korea, South Korea, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea. Soviet-supported aggression continued with North Korea invading South Korea on June 25, 1950, in hopes of reunifying the country, beginning the Korean War. Eventually, Mao Zedong would also commit Chinese forces in support of the war. The Korean War ended in 1953, resulting in a stalemate, with no territory ultimately acquired by either side, but not before 3 million Koreans were killed, in addition to nearly 34,000 Americans killed. The United Nations also took the rare action of collective security, one of two instances in the UN's history, forming a multinational military force that sought to push the invaders out of South Korea. In order for this to take place, the Soviet Union abstained from the UN Security Council vote in protest, authorizing the 21-country multinational force to repel the invasion from the north, with 16 countries sending military units and 5 countries sending medical units. The demilitarized zone was established as a result of the truce between North and South Korea and remains in place as a stare-down point for the North and South militaries. Several efforts have been made to reduce the tension between the two countries on the part of South Korea. North Korea, generally speaking, remains intractable in reducing the tension, though there have been some symbolic events, such as the one on the bottom left of the slide between South Korean President Moon and Supreme Leader Kim on April 27, 2018, and the meeting on the bottom right of the slide between President Trump and Supreme Leader Kim on June 30, 2019. Each time, in a historic manner, the leaders crossed the border to meet with each other, with the border being indicated in the photo on the bottom right by the low concrete barrier which the leaders stepped over. The first democratically elected president in South Korea was Roh Tae-woo in 1987. His election brought significant democratic reforms to South Korea. Another historic election was in 1997 with the election of Kim Dae-jung, a dissident during the South Korean military government. Kim Dae-jung was called South Korea's Nelson Mandela and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000. President Kim was the initiator of the Sunshine Policy in 1998, which sought to create a détente with North Korea such that tensions would be permanently reduced and a basis for negotiations for eventual reunification would be more likely to occur. The theory behind the Sunshine Policy was that reunification between North and South would be more likely if the two countries treated each other as equals. The principles of the Sunshine Policy were that first, there would be no immediate push to reunify the North and the South. 2, no military threat from the North toward the South would be acceptable. 3, the South wished to cooperate with the North and encourage investment in the North. And 4, the North must reciprocate cooperation for this policy to be effective. The drive toward the Sunshine Policy came from the constant provocative actions from the North, both at the DMZ and various military captures such as the USS Pueblo in 1968, a ship still held by North Korea, with the Pueblo's crew repatriated after 11 months imprisonment and torture, as well as the abduction of South Koreans by North Korea in order to indoctrinate them and recruit them for espionage, and the repeated test of North Korean missiles. The result of the Sunshine Policy were that there is a direct humanitarian assistance program from South Korea to North Korea in the tens of millions of dollars, but accompanying this détente was just one summit meeting between the leaders of the two countries, Kim Dae-jung and Kim Jong-il, a few family reunifications, and reopening of the highly culturally symbolic Mount Kumgang in North Korea to travelers from South Korea, depicted on the bottom right. The results were deemed not worth the ultimate price of keeping the policy, as the North simply was not reciprocating enough. The Sunshine Policy lasted for a decade, it being ended by a more hardline president, Lee Myung-bak, in 2008. Though the Sunshine Policy had officially ended, more moderate South Korean presidencies are inspired by the policy's spirit and legacy to continue to engage North Korea, such as the current one of Moon Jae-in, who, as in the previously mentioned slide, crossed the DMZ with Kim Jong-un in April 2018.